So there's a lot of friction because of those different perspectives.
Yes.
Internationally, but in reality, that friction creates opportunities too. That's what also has to be recognized. It doesn't mean that you're going to just lead to abject failure in terms of aspirations to mitigate CO2 emissions. It actually presents some interesting opportunities as well.
Let's talk about the natural gas and LNG markets. You have a great vantage point. You shared before we started the call how you're going to be hosting a top political leader, right? A country leader that you're going to be hosting, and so you're seeing it all. Where is the market shifting in this post-pandemic world? What is it that is striking you as either surprising or as remarkable? You say, "Oh wow, this shift is happening, and this is a big shift." It may not be a tectonic shift, but it is a big shift.
Yeah, so I'll start kind of at the beginning of your question. So prior to the pandemic, so pre-COVID, here at the Baker Institute, we've had the privilege of hosting on average every year 23 delegations, ministerial level delegations from different countries all over the world.
Yes.
And that was a just remarkable learning experience for me.
Yes.
Because the delegations would come in and they would want to talk about the future of energy. They would want to talk about shale because they're in the US and they want to know about shale and energy independence, which there is no such thing as energy independence, but it's, you know, what tips off the conversation. And then we would inevitably get into discussions about the US stance towards energy transitions, environmental objectives, energy poverty, which is the lack of access to modern energy resources. And in different countries around the world, that's a very different discussion than in others. So it was remarkable to see how the general thirst for knowledge and desire to understand what was going on in different dimensions is the same from all these delegations.
Yes.
But the perspectives that they have is very different, right? In each case, it's very different. And that was a really eye-opening experience for me. And it led me to kind of come up with the saying, you view the world from where you sit, right? And it's a remarkable sort of philosophy to use when you approach conversations, no matter where you are in the world, with folks about different things. Because it's not that people don't care about issue A or issue B. They might care about them both. But somebody in region X will care more about issue A than they do B, and somebody in region Y will care more about issue B than issue A, because they're at different stations in life. They're in different circumstances. I mean, and that's what's remarkable about a lot of these discussions about the future of energy is they very much center on those differences in perspectives.
Would you have a specific example? I don't know if you can share so that we can appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first time this happened was, gosh, it must have been back in 2012. There was a delegation that came through from a less developed country.
Yes.
Standard set of questions about, you know, what they'd seen with regard to natural gas in the US being so cheap because of shale, and how that's actually starting to dent coal, and, you know, just the phenomenal wealth of resource that had been unlocked. And then the conversation turned to opportunities to use the same fuel in this country.
Yes.
And they said, look, we get it, but until it's cheaper to get it to us because we don't have it, natural gas isn't really an option for us.
Yes.
However, we do have coal.
Yes.
And then I said, but wait a minute, you know, the general consensus is that coal needs to phase out to address concerns related to CO2 emissions. climate change. And they said, oh, we get that, but you got to understand, we have other concerns too, right? We have a tremendous coal resource, which is heretofore relatively underutilized. So make no mistake, we're going to do everything because it's a large developing country. We're going to do everything.
Yes.
But so that means renewables, that means coal, that means oil. But on the coal front, they were very specific. They said, look, developing our mines, developing infrastructure, rails and architecture to use coal, combust coal, it puts hundreds of thousands of people to work.
Yeah.
Those are the words they used. And I'll never forget that because it resonated with me, right? And it just made me think, that's a different perspective, because this is a country that's trying to grow and improve welfare for all of its citizens.
Yes.
And a big part of that is wealth creation, right? And so they said, look, we're not going to use yesterday's coal technology. They were very clear about that, right? We're looking at next generation coal technologies, different combustion technologies, et cetera. So it's going to be cleaner, but make no mistake, we're going to use coal. So that really rang true. And I think that message that was shared back then, 9 years ago now, has held to be true for this country over the last 9 years. You've seen it in their approach to the negotiations and the COP meetings. I think you'll see it again in Glasgow.
Yes.
I haven't used the country's name, but I think anybody who understands what I'm talking about knows exactly which country I'm referring to. But, it's been interesting because you sort of see this stated very openly in a private conversation, but then in terms of what you see in the press and the news, on the wire, whatever, it's never quite as ardent. But then you hear about representatives from, this country stepping away from the negotiating table because they weren't happy with the way the conversations were going in the COP meetings. So there's a lot of friction because of those different perspectives.
Yes.
Internationally. But in reality, that friction creates opportunities too. That's what also has to be recognized. It doesn't mean that you're going to just lead to abject failure in terms of aspirations to mitigate CO2 emissions. It actually presents some interesting opportunities as well. And I think that's really, to be blunt, what came out of that conversation for me was, look, we're a developing country. We need access to energy resources. We understand there are environmental objectives that are global and local in nature, but we need to do everything we can to generate welfare improvements, so generate wealth within the country. So this is where, from a negotiating standpoint, this country comes to these negotiations. It's like, look, we get it. And you've heard these statements before, undoubtedly. We get it, but we're in this situation not because of what we've done, right? It's because of what you've done. And then you get into these finger pointing games. But in reality, what that's saying is, look, if you want us to avoid this issue, then let's think about what kind of technologies and solutions can be deployed in our country in a low cost way, right? That's really what it comes down to.
So that was a discussion 9 years ago, but I suspect the discussion is still applicable.
It's still like that. It's still like that. We hosted a Chatham House Rules workshop in December of last year with a group of representatives from sub-Saharan African countries. And, they voiced real concerns about access to energy. They voiced real concerns about some of the international capital providers like the European Investment Bank, IMF, World Bank, about their approach to making investments in energy infrastructure. Because what does sub-Saharan Africa have? Generally, a lot of the countries have a wealth of natural gas. And they want to develop it to provide energy domestically. And so that's running headlong into some of these, stances that are being taken by some of these large investment arms. Now, it's important to recognize that just drives them into other sources of capital. So, you've got countries like China who are not shying away from, helping to develop in return for whatever it happens to be. But, it's leading to some interesting geopolitical context too, to say the least. But the conversation is definitely still relevant, in so much as economic growth is a driver. It always has been. It always will be.
Yes. So the question then is for the gas and the LNG industry. Countries are still, they have an energy need that must be fulfilled. They have a need to create jobs, right? If they don't create jobs, these governments don't stay in power. So there is a political reality to it. There is a social reality to it.